Welcome back to another episode of Creedal. This is the first video podcast that I've done in my new space here. It's nothing remarkable as a studio, but we've moved. So this is a new office that I have. The background looks different. It looks pretty unremarkable, to be honest. But here we are. And joining me for this very special first video podcast in this space is Larry Chapp, who's coming to me from his Catholic worker farm in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Larry is an old friend that we were just talking about how I think it was more than 3 years ago that we did our first podcast together. It was great. I learn from him every time. So Larry, I'm really delighted to talk to you again. Welcome back to Creedal.
Yeah, if I'm even a tiny bit famous in a very small pond, it's because I went on your podcast 3 years ago or whatever, and the word began to spread far and wide. So anyway, but thanks a lot. All joking aside, it's great to be here, Zach.
Well, I'm very excited to have you. We're talking about Fiducia Supplicans today.
Yes.
Which is a recent teaching edict from the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith. I suppose the technical term is a declaration,
and that's important.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Why is that important, Larry? Why does it matter what this is?
It's because it's the highest and most authoritative level of any document that can be issued by that particular dicastery. The only thing that would be higher would be a declaration that was in what's called the Forma Specifica, and that means a declaration that is published as a part of the papal magisterium. So Forma Specifica would be a DDF declaration co-published with papal magisterial approval, I guess you'd say. So it's actually part of the papal magisterium. But it is not in the Forma Specifica, which means that it's done with papal approval and it has the Pope's signature, but it's not technically considered to be part of the papal magisterium. It is a document of the magisterium from the DDF and the highest level document of the DDF, but it is not technically part of the papal magisterium.
Great. Yeah. So very important, highest level of teaching that the dicastery can do sort of on its own without it being part of the papal magisterial teaching, and it does, like you said, bear the signature of Francis. So this is a pretty high up document.
Oh yeah, it's magisterial and it's high up there. Yeah,
as far as the DDF.
Not as high as an encyclical or a ecumenical council or something like that, but it's
or an exhortation. Yeah.
Let's put it this way: it's authoritative. We have to pay attention to it.
Yeah. So it's authoritative, and it is designed to present some new teaching on the pastoral meaning of blessings. Now, the history here, in 2021, this same teaching body, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, I think at that time it was still a congregation, although, because Pope Francis has done this reorganization.
Yeah. Used to be called the CDF.
Right. But in 2021, the CDF, then named the CDF, published a teaching that basically said, look, you cannot bless gay marriages or gay unions because that is a different form of human union that is not intended by God to be fulfilled in a sexual manner. That is only marriage between a man and a woman. And this teaching is trying to clarify a bit more, or really, in its own words, sort of add additional meaning to this teaching on blessings and the pastoral meaning of blessings. Now, Larry, we haven't talked about this yet much. We've texted just a little bit here and there. And I'm sorry, it looks like my camera is still out. So I might, once you're chatting, I might try to troubleshoot here.
Sure.
We've chatted about this a little bit, just over text. There are two different modes of receiving this that we have seen across the world. One mode says, this is horrible, this is an absolute disaster, this is a confusing teaching at best, this is a heretical teaching at worst, and there's lots of consternation and scandal about what this new teaching is saying. On the other hand, there are people who are saying this is a beautiful document, giving us an authentic development of the teaching on what a blessing is and how a blessing can be given and dispensed by Holy Mother Church. And this is, frankly, a very welcome change, and so we need to implement this now, and this is the Church moving in the right direction, etc. And those responses are basically coming from the people whom you'd expect. Now, I will ask you in just a minute for your take, Larry. My take, very briefly, doesn't really fall on either of those lines. I'm not concerned that this is, the Church upending her millennia-old teaching on the fundamental reality of marriage. I'm not concerned that this is, now declaring a free-for-all for the celebration of gay marriage. I really just think, and we can talk about the subsequent press release and then the reception of this document by bishop conferences around the world, I really think this is just an absolute disaster of a rollout. And honestly, I've read through the document. I've annotated it. I have my copy here in front of me. This is probably the most lightweight theological thing I have ever read coming out of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. I just think it's an abject disaster. This is Cardinal Fernandez, whom Pope Francis just recently installed a few months ago in this position, heading up this Dicastery. This is his big moment, his first moment doing something big, shaking things up, and it has been just an abject disaster. I think really no matter how you slice it. That's my brief take. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely correct. What I've said in places like X, Twitter, and Facebook is that it's a train wreck. I consider it to be a pastoral train wreck. No, it's not heretical. And so all the people that are screaming, further proof that Pope Francis is a heretic and just, calm their jets. You're actually hurting people's faith and getting people to think that, the Pope and the Vatican have all fallen into heresy. It's not true. In some ways, it's almost worse than heresy, right? A heresy you can point at, look to and say, here's what's wrong. This is exactly why this is heretical, condemn it, and sort of move on. It would be bad if it were the Pope doing it, but if it's just some flunky at the DDF, Fernandez, uttering heresy, you can point that out without damaging the church. Nevertheless, I don't think it is heretical. It's still it's a pastoral train wreck on a multiplicity of levels. What I like to say is that it's a train wreck in the sense that you're right. It's utterly theologically superficial. It's also internally incoherent. It is internally contradictory. And what this is I think, as I've said before, I think this is a conclusion in search of an argument. I think that the Vatican has looked out at the broader ecclesial landscape and looked up to places like Germany and the German synodal way. And they see that there are people within more liberal enclaves of the church in Europe that want full-on sort of gay marriages essentially in the church, to give liturgical blessings through official liturgical ceremonies in German or Danish churches and whatever to homosexual couples. And so the Vatican's looking at that and say, oh, well, we got a big problem here because we certainly can't allow that. But then they're looking over at, say, their own previous document and maybe more conservative dioceses that say, in no way can we ever extend an olive branch or a blessing or something to these people. No way. It's a sinful union and so on. So the Vatican's looking at that. And what they should have done is to say the 2021 document is correct. The church cannot bless these unions, and then moved on to figure out ways in which the church can pastorally minister to homosexuals in extremely compassionate ways that are effective. All right? But instead, Cardinal Fernandez decided that he wants to find a way to do blessings of gay couples. Okay? I think that's the conclusion he had in his brain. I want to do a halfway house measure here. I don't want to go full-on German. I don't want to go full-on scorched earth, Cardinal Mueller, Cardinal Burke. I want to sketch out some sort of middle path. So he invents this sort of middle position, and it is purely an invention. And this middle position is there are blessings that priests can give that are not sacramentals, that are not liturgically oriented in any way, shape, or form, that are utterly outside of that whole sacramental liturgical realm. And those blessings, this is the first major sort of distinction that Fernandez makes that is incorrect. In order to carve out this invented middle position, there are priestly blessings that aren't really priestly blessings. And that's the trouble with it. It's very contrary to the Second Vatican Council, by the way, which sought to, in some sense, make priestly blessings less magical, less clericalistic. It wanted to make sure that priestly blessings were embedded within the church's liturgy, within its sacramental system, that we're not dealing with the image of a priest as a kind of shaman or a magical quasi-guy with some kind of magic wand that he could wave over people who had special powers of his own, separate from those of the church. No, the reason why people seek out priestly blessings, the reason why anybody wants a priest to bless them, and not me or you or any other lay person, is precisely because they sense the full sacramental weight of the church behind a priestly blessing. The priest, after all, has holy orders. The priest is himself a walking sacrament, if you will, in persona Christi. So what they want is that priestly blessing, and for that reason. And so the DDF document in 2021 was entirely correct. when it reaffirmed the teaching of Vatican II that all priestly blessings are, however much downstream from the liturgy, are in some sense within the world of liturgy, oriented back towards the sacraments and liturgy. There's simply no such thing as a non-sacramentally ordered priestly blessing. That's Fernandez's first mistake here. He invents, and he himself says, this is a development of doctrine. This is innovative. This is what's new in the document. I have discerned in the tradition this kind of non-liturgical priestly blessing. He's wrong about that, and many people have pointed that out. The second mistake that he then makes in trying to scope out this invented middle is to say that we can bless couples but not their relationship. This is probably the most absurd and internally incoherent thing that the document tries to get. We're blessing individuals who are simply seeking to become better Christians. Well, of course, we did that. We can always do that. Priests can always bless sinners. There's a great, by the way, priestly blessing for sinners, and everybody can get it. It's called going to confession. It comes with a great blessing at the end that absolves your sins. You might want to try it. Okay? And the fact is that it's simply an attack on a straw man to say that the church has never before been able to bless sinners. We're all sinners. We get blessed at the end of every Mass. Go in peace. There's
Absolutely.
Blessing.
Yep.
You know, and we're all sinners. The church has always blessed sinners. What's this nonsense that we're now inventing a new kind of non-liturgical blessing so that we can bless repentant sinners? So now we're going to bless these homosexual couples, but we're not going to treat them as relationship couples. They're just two individual people holding hand and wearing wedding rings who are presenting themselves to us for a blessing of their mutual lives together. And this is where the document is incoherent, because it says what is being blessed are the positive aspects of their relationship, the mutuality, the compassion, the helping each other when they're sick, that kind of thing. So which is it? So now we're splitting yet another hair to scope out this middle position. And this further hair that we're splitting is we're blessing a couple, but not the relationship, yet we are really blessing just the positive elements of that relationship. So now we're splitting hairs about the good bits and the bad bits in the relationship, and we're not blessing the bad bits. The 2021 document explicitly said, this kind of distinction making is what we cannot do because it's incoherent. It is inherent in the nature of the couples who are presenting themselves for the blessing that they're in a relationship. The presumption has to be that they're in a relationship, and that if you bless them, you're blessing the relationship. Now, if two people were to come up to you just randomly, and that's why Fernandez keeps saying, it's got to be spontaneous, it's got to be spontaneous. But, you know, if two people just walk up to any priest randomly and say, hey, Father, could you give us a blessing? We're really struggling in our lives. There's not a priest on the face of the earth that would say no to them and say, no, take a hike. I'm not going to bless you. Of course, that kind of blessing can be given, and it's always been able to be given. So what's different here? Yeah. What's different is now we're explicitly stating if two gay men or two gay women come and up to a priest and say, hey, we're a gay couple and we want you to bless us, the priest is now supposed to bless them without blessing their union or their relationship. And this is where I think the pastoral disaster creeps in and why people are suspicious of it. You mean to tell me that the Vatican was absolutely clueless as to what the current cultural situation is in Western culture with regard to homosexual marriage and relationships and so forth, that there are already vast swaths of the church that see nothing wrong with any of this, and that as soon as the document hit the ground, it was going to be spun in the direction of Vatican approves gay blessings. And that's exactly how it was spun. There's Father James Martin setting up a photo op with the New York Times in his apartment, blessing this married gay couple that he's known for years. All right, and violating every rule in Fiducia Supplicans, apparently, the letter of it. But most of us who see it as a pastoral disaster view that as exactly, in some sense, what the document intends. Right. Because they had to know that this is how it was going to be spun. And if it's not what it intends, then is the Vatican going to discipline Father James Martin?
Of course not. We know the answer to that. Of course not.
No, of course not. He's a voting member of the Synod. He works for the Vatican in their communications department. He's had frequent private meetings with Pope Francis.
He gets letters from Pope Francis supporting his work.
Letters from Pope Francis supporting his work, and so on. And so don't tell me at all that I'm just, you're a Francis-hating, Pope-hating, right-wing nutshell.
Tratty fuddy-duddy, Larry.
Yeah, you just can't see. Here's what, this way, all the Pope splainers are out there saying, read the document, I did read the document.
I did as well.
Okay.
I have the same exact reaction to you, and I want to get into the document because I saw the same thing, Larry. I saw a lot of consternation when this first came out. I did not have a chance to read it the first day that it came out. I saw the dialogue back and forth, and I saw oh my goodness, this document's the worst thing that's ever come out of Rome. And I saw the sort of read the document. It's actually a beautiful encapsulation of the Church's Theology of Blessings, and it's a great development. Okay, so I read it. Like I said, this is one of the most theologically lightweight things I've ever read. I want to get into that. I think if I refresh my page here, it will fix my camera view. So let me try to do that real quick. And
okay, go ahead. And there you are.
Okay, here we are. Hopefully we didn't lose anything there. Okay, great. So let's get into the document. I have it here in front of me. I want to call attention to a few things in here. There, of course, are some good things here, specifically when it's affirming what the 2021 declaration of the CDF said. I think it's good. It's pretty strong. Larry, as a professionally trained theologian who taught at the university level for many years, what would you say to the claim in paragraph 8 of Fiducia Supplicans that blessings are among the most widespread and evolving sacramentals?
Well, I would say that it's right. It's one of the most widespread, but I have no idea what the document means by evolving.
Exactly. Okay.
I think that's just a very convenient term that Cardinal Fernandez throws in there in order to justify the fact that this document represents a big evolving.
Yes.
If you're going to say the church can now offer priestly blessings that are somehow detached from the church as such.
Right.
Right. It's just sort of some sort of magic blessing from the priest. All right, and that it's going to go towards people that are in sinful unions,
right?
And I don't say that in a finger wagging way. I'm just speaking objectively as a trained theologian. The church teaches, that if you're divorced and remarried without benefit of an annulment, that you are most likely in an immoral union. See, there's another thing too. It says irregular unions. We have to distinguish between a blessing of homosexual couples and blessing those who are divorced and remarried without an annulment. Because an annulment doesn't create a new situation. An annulment simply declares a situation to be true. And the church, and annulments are neither infallible nor particularly fallible. They're simply the church's best judgment, and that your first marriage was not validly sacramental, and therefore we are dispensing you, and in good conscience you can move forward and take communion.
Right.
Hey, I myself have an annulment, so I and I know what this is about. But but there's also situations, and Amoris Laetitia makes this clear, and why I'm not one of the grand horrible critics of that famous footnote in Amoris Laetitia, where the Pope says there are circumstances in which it might be clear to a priest on the ground that the couple before him really, that they were not in valid marriages before. And it's very clear to him that the previous marriages were invalid. But it can't be proven in an annulment process, right, because there are no witnesses, there's no documentation, for whatever. Sometimes it is simply impossible to move forward with an annulment. And so what the Pope is saying, there might be cases in which a priest can simply recognize, I think they're in a valid marriage right now, and so I'm going to green light them to go to communion. Now, the danger, of course, is that everybody thinks their case is an exception.
Of course, yeah.
And now the great pressure is on every single pastor to simply say, okay, you can go to communion. And in that sense, the document, Amoris Laetitia, was deeply flawed because it should have laid out extremely specific criteria for priests to follow in these cases and so on, or simply reform the annulment process or
sure,
or whatever.
Yep.
But my point is simply this. Yes, you might be in an irregular union of divorced and remarried without benefit of annulment, but you may actually be in a valid marriage.
Yep.
Whether or not the church can declare it as such or not is going to require discernment.
Makes sense.
That's
yeah.
different from gay unions,
which is impossible ontologically speaking to be
ontologically impossible.
Right.
There is absolutely no way, and this is one good thing about Fiducia Supplicans, right? And a lot of conservatives have pointed this out. At least it says that the church's teaching on marriage is firmly, reestablished in this document. And it says for now, but we'll see. That's kind of bad. But the fact of the matter is, it does reaffirm the traditional teaching.
Yeah, let me actually,
if that's true.
Let me actually read that part real quick.
Read
This is paragraphs 4 and 5. Therefore, rites and prayers that could create confusion between what constitutes marriage, which is the exclusive, stable, and indissoluble union between a man and a woman, naturally open to the generation of children, and what contradicts it, are inadmissible. This conviction is grounded in the perennial Catholic doctrine of marriage. It is only in this context that sexual relations find their natural, proper, and fully human meaning. The Church's doctrine on this point remains firm. This is also the understanding of marriage that is offered by the gospel. For this reason, when it comes to blessings, the Church has the right and the duty to avoid any rite, R-I-T-E, that might contradict this conviction or lead to confusion. Such is also the meaning of the response of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, the 2021 document we were talking about, which states that the Church does not have the power to impart blessings on unions of persons of the same sex. So that's where we start. Okay, all good there. Then we get to this claim in paragraph 8 that blessings are among the most widespread and evolving sacramentals, and then we go into the liturgical meaning of the rites of blessing. In paragraph 13, we have a quote from Pope Francis that Fernandez employs, and basically says, Pope Francis urges us not to, quote, lose pastoral charity, which should permeate all our decisions and attitudes, and to avoid being judges who only deny, reject, and exclude, end quote. Then he says, Fernandez, let us then respond to the Holy Father's proposal by developing a broader understanding of blessings. So, I mean, this is just so tenuous, right? The Church has this very rich theology of blessings. They are among the most widespread of sacramentals. They are not among the most evolving, as Fernandez claims. And then but they are widespread already. I mean, he already made that point. Like, everybody gets a blessing. You go to Mass, you get a blessing. You go to confession, you get a blessing. And so they're super widespread already. But because Fernandez says, well, Pope Francis said we can't lose pastoral charity, and we have to we can't only deny, reject, or exclude. So we must then re-examine our theology of blessings and figure out if there's a new type of blessing to impart or a new mode in which we can do so. Very, I think, tenuous foundations there to begin with.
Yeah. The fact is, the Church has always been able to bless repentant sinners. So, if somebody walks up to you, let's say you've got a neo-Nazi couple, husband and a wife, neo-Nazis, walk up to you, and they're wearing swastika. They have tattoos, swastika tattoos on their foreheads, and so on. And they walk up to a priest and say, "Look, we're just emerging out of a sort of neo-Nazi cult, and we really would like to repent from that, and we really would like your blessing to help us get over this." Okay, fine. Or, but if a couple of skinhead neo-Nazis were to walk up to a priest, or let's say a dude in a KKK hood were to walk up to a priest and say, "Hey, Father, I'm on my way to a Grand Wizard meeting.
Right.
Could you give me a blessing so that I can try and become a better person?" The priest is going to say, "Wait, you take off your hood."
Yeah, right.
And I might think about it.
Right.
And then we need to have a little chat. Or in my blessing over you right now, the blessing is going to contain a strong admonition.
Perhaps an exorcism even. Yeah.
Yeah, that you repent from what you're about to do.
Right.
So I once said to someone who was involved in the Synod and Synodality when I was in Rome, because it was being debated then too, I'd be all in favor of priestly blessings of homosexual couples if the blessing contained an explicit reference of the need to repent from sexual sins.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think actually a really interesting idea, Rick. Rather than operating this sort of nebulous territory where we can do like non-liturgical blessings that have to be spontaneous and pastoral, how about we just make a new rite of blessing for couples who are in irregular unions, and this blessing has an admonition and a movement towards repentance contained within it. I mean, that'd be interesting. That'd be very interesting.
Yeah, I'd be all in favor of that, and because it would number one, it would reinforce the notion of pastoral gradualism that Pope Francis seems to love, and I applaud him for it. That you have to meet people where they are. It can't be all just draconian morality turtles all the way down.
Right.
That we are a church. It is a field hospital. We are calling people to sanctity. We are calling people up higher. It's one of the problems I do have with this papacy is it seems to set a very low bar in that regard. It seems to have just set the whole call to sanctity thing aside, and everything's a field hospital. Field hospital is still a hospital, by the way. It's still supposed to cure people.
Yep.
It's not a hospice.
Right.
It's a field hospital, not a hospice. All right. And so the church at some point needs to be telling people, okay, here's your diabetes medicine. Now stop eating the Snickers bars. Okay. Because you're not going to get better if you keep living on Snickers bars. You're diabetic. And so the spiritual equivalent of that. So if we're going, so the point is that we've always been able to bless sinners, always. So what's new here?
Right.
Okay. What's new here? And it says, we have to reach out in pastoral charity. We can't shut any doors. Oh, really? Do they really mean that? They're not going to shut any door. So like I said, if the Grand Wizard of the KKK walks up to a priest with his hood on and says, I'm on my way to do a cross-burning ceremony and I want you to bless me, the priest, there's obviously going to be limits to this. There are obviously going to be situations in which it's clearly the case where the priest can't bless this. This notion that we can bless without appearing to approve is really a very slippery distinction that's going on here. So the point is that what they clearly want to do is to say, well, gay blessings are not in the same category as neo-Nazis and KKK wizards. So cut that out. These are just struggling honest, and they're right about that. On the whole hierarchy of sins, I wouldn't put gay sex up there with being, the head of the Ku Klux Klan. Not at all. But the point is, the church says it is sinful. All right, and we cannot, in the current cultural situation that we are in, appear to be engaged in a process of what some have called incrementalism.
I think it's helpful. I saw some commentator online. It might have even been you, Larry. I don't know, but someone online, and I think this is a helpful analogy, said, let's not run with the Ku Klux Klan one. Let's just say someone who, is a married 50-year-old, and then he has this paramour who's 30 years old,
right,
and he's having an affair with her, and they go to mass together, and afterward they approach the priest and ask for a blessing. I mean, the priest is going to be like, well, I know you, and I know your wife is at home, and you're asking me to bless this person. I cannot bless this relationship, right? Because you are in an objective state of sin. You can come to confession. Let's do that.
I didn't come up with that analogy, but it is a better one because it at least pertains to so-called irregular unions. Right. I simply usually drag out the neo-Nazi or the KKK example in order to point out that almost everybody would universally agree you can't bless that without appearing to approve something truly heinous.
Right.
Okay, but you're absolutely right. I've seen this example too. The 50-year-old man who has a midlife crisis, who leaves his wife and 3 kids to take up with some 25-year-old little chippy, some little trophy wife. And, then he comes to Father, can you give me a blessing here with my new young wife?
I love the accents that you assign to these people, by the way. This is great.
Yeah, you can't do that. You can't do that. So the deal is this. Fernandez is saying we're going to have these blessings that don't imply approval. And my point is that when you're dealing in our current cultural situation, and you've got gay men and women presenting themselves to priests, and we've seen the pictures, in the sanctuary of Catholic churches.
Wearing rainbow stoles in at least one instance.
Wearing a rainbow stole.
Which makes it a liturgical blessing.
And they're holding hands, and they're civilly married, and they've got wedding rings, and you're telling me that priest now blessing them does not imply approval. Of course it does.
Yep.
And that's why I would say this. I would be all in favor, because the document goes out of its way over and over and over again to put people like me on the defensive, on you on the defensive, like, what's wrong? All we're doing are blessing repentant sinners. These are people that are coming to God for his mercy and his grace, and they just want a blessing to increase God's mercy and grace in their lives. And I would say, well, that's great. But they're not presenting themselves in most cases that way. The gay couples that Father Martin blessed, for example, in his op-ed, did they come up to him and say, Father, we're in a gay relationship and we're trying not to have sex. We're trying to live chastely as the church teaches. So please give us a blessing to help us achieve that goal. I'd be all in favor of such a blessing. Yeah. All right. But that's not what they said. And that's not what is being said. The document creates a fake blessee. Let's put it that way. A fake class of people being blessed. And that fake class of people being blessed are people in gay relationships who are truly repentant of the sexual dimensions of those relationships and are now in church seeking the mercy and grace of God to overcome their sexual sins and want a priest to bless them in order for that to happen. Guess what? That doesn't have to be a non-liturgical, informal blessing. If a gay couple comes to a priest and says, we repent of our sexual sins and we want you to bless us, the priest can put on a stole and a vestment and he can bless them for that, okay?
Yep.
Full on. And you know what? Some gay rights groups have sort of pointed out, you know what? This blessing is actually very homophobic that Fernandez has come up with. Because what Fernandez is saying, yes, we can bless the gays, but quietly, in the back of church, hush-hush, with no publicity, and very spontaneously. And then he even goes so far as to say, it only should take 10 or 15 seconds, and then you're done with it in the clarification, right? And a lot of homosexuals are looking at that going, well, what in the heck are you saying then? What kind? Who in their right mind is going to seek out this blessing? Hey, Father, over here in the dark, in the alley, please bless us quickly before somebody sees us, because we don't want to get you in trouble. I mean, that's essentially the kind of blessing that Fernandez has in mind here. But he knows darn well that's not how it's going to go.
Yeah.
He knows darn well that it's going to go like it's going to go in most places. Priest with a stole on in a sanctuary blessing a relationship. He knows darn well that that's what's going to happen. These are not repentant sinners coming before the church asking for... And Fernandez makes a big deal about the fact that there are those of, like me, who are demanding moral perfection before a blessing can be given. Are you kidding me? What a straw man.
Yes.
I'm not morally perfect. Every time I go to confession, I admit I'm not morally perfect and I'm seeking a blessing for God's help. Nobody, absolutely nobody in the church is recommending that blessings be withheld from people who are struggling in sin, still enmeshed in their sins, but desiring to get out of them. No one is denying that those people should be blessed.
I mean, who among us has not confessed habitual sin in the confessional before and said, like, this is something...
Oh, sign me up.
This is something I struggle with.
I confess the same sins over and over.
Of course. I mean, there's so much to respond to what you just said, Larry. I agree with it all entirely. On the point about this being, as you said, a solution in search of a problem, I think you're absolutely right. Fernandez he's created...
It's a problem in search of it. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I said it was a conclusion in search of an argument.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's a solution in search of a problem, I think.
It is.
Because, just as you said, he sort of invents this class of people. He invents this class of priest as well, who doesn't give the blessings when they're requested. I don't know a single priest. I think the document even, maybe it's the clarification that mentions like shrine things and pilgrimages and, like spontaneous blessings given at those. There's not a priest in the world who, when he gives the blessing on the congregation at the end of Mass, says, all of you who are living in irregular unions, please leave the building so I can extend this blessing over the pure of heart. I mean, that's not the point of this. There's really, like, this is all entirely fiction. I don't know a single priest who would ever withhold a general blessing like that. And again, if someone comes to them in goodwill and says, like, I'm struggling with this habitual sin, or like, hey, look, my partner and I, we came into church for the first time in decades last Sunday, and we came back again this Sunday, and like now we're really wrestling with some of these things that you said in the pulpit today, and like it's really gripping us. But like we've been together for 20 years, and this is really hard for us. Can you bless us? I don't know a single priest, even the most traditional priest I know. I don't know a single one of them who would say, "I will not bless you for that." No.
You might find here and there some absolutely harsh and absurd priest. But very rare, very, very rare. It brings up a very good point, Zach, which is this. I like that, solution in search of a problem, because it's invented this whole class of blessees. It's also invented a whole class of priests as straw men. The first document, Fiducia, before the declare, says, that these blessings should be given without a great deal of preliminary moral interrogation, because that then places a kind of elitist sense of priestly control over the whole situation. What in the hell are you talking about?
No, so this,
what kind of blessings are out there? My goodness. You make it sound like the priesthood are a group of goose-stepping Nazis.
I know.
For crying out loud. I've used the Nazis a lot in this, but anyway, a lot of real nut jobs. You want a blessing? Well, sit down here. I want to interrogate you first. I don't give my blessings out to just nobody.
Right.
I mean, come on. It also underscores this problem, that the actual situation in the church on the ground in, I'd say, at least North America and in Europe, that's what I know, is the exact opposite. The actual problem is relativism, a runaway latitudinarianism, a runaway moral laxity. You go into any Catholic parish that I've ever been in my entire life, going back to this, the 1960s as a little boy, I don't think I've ever been in a Catholic church where the vast, vast, vast majority of parishioners didn't stand up at communion and go up for communion.
Yep.
In a congregation of, say, 500, you might find 498 come up for communion.
I was going to say 490, but yeah, probably 498.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, that's kind of strange. And usually the ones who don't go up are like the Protestant husband or wife
Right.
of a Catholic spouse.
Sure.
And so they're respecting the church's teaching in this, I'm not going to come up for communion because I'm a Baptist. I'm just here because I love my wife or whatever. In fact, I go to an Anglican ordinary church, and there are some people in our church that are like that.
Sure.
You know, they don't go up for communion because they're Protestant, but
Yep.
they're there because their spouse is Catholic. All right? And so we've got where are these parish police officers standing in the communion line, pulling people they know are unrepentant sinners out of that line? You get out of this line right now. I know who you are. That's not at all the problem. The problem is almost exactly the opposite, that we've completely lost in the church any sense of Eucharistic discipline. And by the way, this same Pope and his same, curial regime, if you want to call it this way, has also gone out of its way to poo-poo any notion of Eucharistic discipline.
Yes, absolutely, for sure.
The Pope has said many times, I've never denied communion to anybody. Well, good for you, but maybe you should have.
Right, not a prize for the perfect, or medicine for the sick,
Oh,
et
yeah.
cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So that brings me to the second thing I was going to respond to, which is your point about how really this is, this really is sort of homophobic. Like, let's just do it in the back of the church, like hush, just sit here for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
That's all that this should really take, right? Just sort of get them the blessing, and it's got to be spontaneous, yada yada. I think one of the problems here is this is certainly Fernandez's, and I would say, respectfully, the Holy Father's sort of understanding of pastoral practice. There's a paragraph in Fiducia Supplicans that says, the church, moreover, must shy away from resting its pastoral praxis on the fixed nature of certain doctrinal or disciplinary schemes, especially when they lead to, quote, a narcissistic and authoritarian elitism, whereby instead of evangelizing, one analyzes and classifies others, and instead of opening the door to grace, one exhausts his or her energies in inspecting and verifying, which is exactly what you're talking about. That is a quotation from Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium. But this whole thing, like, we can't rest our pastoral praxis on the fixed nature of dogmatic and doctrinal schemes. What else do you rest it on if you don't rest it on that? And the problem, Larry, is that when we divorce the pastoral practice from anything that is fixed, we end up with just this ecclesiastical, this liturgical free-for-all where no one actually knows up from down, left from right. And you end up with people very confused on what the church actually teaches. So
That's
it
right.
reminds me of what Benedict wrote in Caritas and Veritate, right? You can't have love without actually also proclaiming the truth. So some of our highest clerics want to think that we can just have this sort of like pastoral practice that's about loving people, but loving must also entail the truth, because if it doesn't, then it's actually not love, right? It's just, think of today how it's there in certain quarters, unfortunately some very prominent quarters, it's viewed as violence if you call a transgender person by their actual name, by their actual identity.
You misgender them, and you get hauled off into court.
And the claim about the violence of misgendering is that it does violence to call me something that is not in accordance with my nature. And that is a claim with which we agree, which is exactly why we will not call them something that is not in accordance with their nature, right?
That's right.
So to be loving, you actually have to proclaim truth. Otherwise, it's not love at all. It's just
That's right.
It's allowing them to be further and further away from the truth.
Dude, you have a wig on and a fake bra, but you're a dude, so I'm going to call you a man.
Right.
And if I call you a woman, that's the violence.
Exactly. Exactly.
Therein, I'm committing violence against you because
Exactly
I'm
right.
acquiescing into an untruth.
Exactly.
But you put your finger on something extremely important, which is that Fiducia Supplicans is part of a broader pattern of this papacy. And people say, oh, it's a heretical papacy. I don't think so. You know what it is? It's theologically stupid papacy.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say that point blank. And I'm not saying Zach Crippen shares Larry Chapp's views.
Well, I would say theologically sloppy at a minimum. I don't think
let's put it this way. Nothing sends an alarm bell off in my brain as a theologian more than to hear, as you just said, somebody from either the Vatican or from wherever who says, well, these blessings or the Pope Francis' pastoral style is predicated on the idea that we have to love people. Well, the reason why that's superficial and incoherent and drives me bat blank crazy is because it begs the question. It begs the question of what constitutes a loving act. And this papacy routinely pits truth against mercy, doctrine against compassion, human nature versus pastoral exigencies, and so on. It's always pitting them against each other. And that quote that you gave, all right, is a perfect example of this, where if you are going to base your pastoral practice on the fixed truths of revelation, you are guilty of something. You are guilty of narcissism. I mean, it goes on to narcissism, and you are not loving properly. You're not being pastoral. You're being narcissistic because you're insisting on truth first, people second, as if those two things are not deeply connected with one another. Now, if there is a small bandwidth here, a small group of people for whom that caricature probably does apply, namely far right-wing Catholics who are deeply ideological about dogmas and are little heresy-hunting mini-me Torquemadas, mini-me, right? Going after, searching after every divergence from church doctrine and judging people based in this way. We all know people like that, right? The sort of doctrinally but then the question becomes, are those people themselves really adhering to ecclesial truth, the truth of revelation? Or have they turned certain dogmas into idols themselves? They've fallen victim to what Ratzinger called ecclesiasticism, where the church points towards Christ, where they stop short at simply the church and turn the church into a kind of an idol, and therefore you have to hold. And so I get what that paragraph you quoted is aiming at here, but it is so poorly written, so incoherently written, and so freighted and larded with a certain 1970s style opposition of truth with mercy that it just makes me want to yank whatever hairs are still left in my head right on out. Because it begs the question of what the loving thing actually is. So you say, what do we base it on if we don't base it on the truth? Well, what they're basing it on, it's very clear, and it goes with their motu proprio on the reform of theology. You want to base it on people's experiences. You begin not with the truths of revelation, you begin with subjective human experience. And you view subjective human experience as already in some sense engraced by God. This is a kind of some ways a sort of runaway theology of grace where everything is always already so engraced that we can't confine it. It is true, we can't confine grace to the church and so on. But to so break down those barriers that everyone everywhere is already engraced totally and completely with salvific grace. And what that then does is to valorize everybody's subjective experience. Everybody is a walking locus of tradition and revelation. Everybody's a walking vessel of the Holy Spirit's revelatory power. And therefore we can't simply point to the Nicene Creed or the dogmas of the church. We have to look at people's subjective experiences because the Holy Spirit is there too. And if subjective experience contradicts some dogma of the church, we can't simply presume to begin with the dogma of the church in order to disabuse people of their wrong ideas. We have to sit down and take seriously that maybe they're right. And the dogmas, though not completely wrong, need to be nuanced and further developed and so on. This is what we're up against here. And the fact that I keep getting accused by the Pope-splainers of being hated, no, I've been around the block a few times. And this is called incrementalism. All right? What it's called, it's been in the progressive playbook for decades. You begin with a little tiny affirmation. Here's all we're doing. We're just blessing sinners. What the hell's wrong with all you people?
The accents are on point today, Larry. They're on point.
All right. And then as soon as that little camel's nose is under the tent, the whole camel comes in. Well, if we're blessing these people, then let's go the next step. And it's called incrementalism. Yeah. They've done it for decades. We're not idiots. And the entire thing is completely incoherent, shallow, as you said.
What's the distinction for the gradualism of the law versus the law of gradualism? Right?
Law of gradualism, yeah.
That same idea for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's been, I honestly have been surprised at a few people who have been, I think, overly defensive of this document. I just think, even from an objective point of view, this document is a disaster. And I think I'm well supported in that claim, given the fact that this document said, essentially, I don't know exactly where the quote is, but it said, this is the final word on this topic. Do not expect any further clarification from this office. And it took roughly 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, for that office to publish a press release trying to clarify and sort of walk back and talk through some of the things. It's interesting. I know we were almost out of time, Larry, but briefly, I'll include this in the show notes as well. And I don't know if you've seen this, Larry, but there's a nice article from the pillarcatholic.com, talking through some of the responses of bishops' conferences around the world to this document. And I'll share. I wish I could share screen. It's not working right now, but the usual players are all involved. Basically, an Austrian bishop, Archbishop Franz Lochner, says, he was asked how priests respond to a same-sex couple's request for blessing. He says, basically now a priest can no longer say no. The Belgian bishops are really excited about this. Essentially, all of the African bishops are very furious about it, and several of them have said we are not going to implement this because, in particular, of the risk of scandal and causing confusion to our people, and that it would injure pastoral charity, actually, which is of course ironic given that paragraph 30 of Fiducia says pastoral prudence and wisdom avoids all serious forms of scandal and confusion among the faithful, when that's exactly what this one is doing. So the point is, across the world, we've had divergent responses from bishop conferences, lots of confusion, which is exactly why the press release was happening. And I think the press release is really sort of a CYA for Fernandez as well, who's really concerned probably about his job security here, because he has kicked off maybe the biggest ecclesial crisis of the Francis papacy. Maybe not quite, but it's certainly up there. It's definitely top
I think
five.
it is. I think it is. And the point is that so many things have been exposed by this document. Number one, what has been exposed is the lie that the current Vatican cares about the peripheries, the margins. What this document is obsessed with are precisely the petty bourgeois sexual concerns of the global north. It is not a document, and nor has any document come out of the Vatican recently that shows the slightest bit of concern for the major concerns of the global south. I was talking to an African when I was in Rome covering the synod, and he made this very point, that all of the concerns that everybody wants to talk about, from women's ordination to gay marriage and so on, are the concerns of the global north, not the global south. And we in Africa have a whole different set of concerns that don't involve this, and the Vatican doesn't seem to care. So what's all this nonsense about the peripheries, the margins? It's kind of exposed that that's false. The other thing that's being exposed here as false is synodality.
Yes.
Because this document was proposed precisely in non-synodal ways. They had their synod on synodality in October, and my guess is they wanted that synod in its final document to say something about the need for the church to develop perhaps a look at blessings for same-sex unions. The Africans, and indeed many Italian bishops and some French bishops, pushed back against including any of that in the final document of the synod. And so nothing about LGBTQ stuff showed up in the final document of the synod. Nothing. And that really angered a lot of people, all right, the progressives. Cardinal Supich, for example, on the plane ride home, or soon after he got home, in an interview said, well, don't forget the document. The document's not important. What's important is the event, the process, that the wheels have been set in motion. Yeah, that was damage control. All right, so the fact is they didn't get what they wanted from this Potemkin village called the Synod. All right, they didn't get that. So out comes Fiducia. And by the way, Fernandez let the cat out of the bag when he says that they've been working on this document for some time, which means even as the Synod was going on, yep. And this was in our more synodal listening church of Parrhesia, where all voices are heard. Oh, now for the first time in 2,000 years, the Holy Spirit is being heard through the people of God. And we're now, all while that Parrhesia listening's going on, the DDF is coming up with its own document anyway, out of the mind of Cardinal Fernandez. And so lump, boom, thud, it hits the ground, and half of the world's Episcopal conferences look at this and go, why did we even have a synod then? What was that? What was all that talking and listening all about over there? What was all that? How many hundreds of thousands of euros did we spend on a synod just so Cardinal Fernandez could lump this and dump this on us? There was actually a Spanish bishop, I can't remember his name, who gave an interview in Catholic News Agency, who said this very same thing. He goes, look, I'm not opposed to, outreach to homosexuals. I'm not opposed to blessings of homosexuals. What I'm opposed to is the very non-synodal way that this was brought forward. And the chaos that has ensued and the kickback that has ensued has been precisely caused by the non-synodal nature of the way this was promulgated, okay? And what's really outrageous about it is that it's a change in pastoral practice that affects the entire church. on a very hot button issue. And if there's ever an issue that should have been vetted with the world's bishops, this is the issue that it should have been vetted with the world's bishops.
Totally agree.
And it sort of was obliquely through the synod on synodality, and they didn't get what they wanted.
Right.
Finally, I'm going to say one last thing with regard to the crisis this has created. There are certain pope-splainers who are very famous on internet who have come out and compared those of us who have dissented from Fiducia Supplicans with those who dissented from Humanae Vitae. And they've even called Fiducia Supplicans the Humanae Vitae of our time.
Well, that is absolutely absurd. That is
it's so absurd. Well, what it only goes to show how desperate the pope-splainers are, that now they're grasping at any straw. So what they're saying is any document that comes out of the Vatican, just insofar as it comes out of the Vatican, is by definition beyond any criticism, any dissent, any whatsoever of any kind. And it's all of the same. First off, Humanae Vitae was an encyclical from a pope.
Right.
One of the highest
Different
teaching authorities of the church. Yeah. Different level. Very high. This is simply a declaration from the DDF. Second, Humanae Vitae reaffirmed 2,000 years of Christian tradition.
It didn't invent something new.
It reaffirmed a Catholic teaching.
Right.
It didn't depart from it. It didn't develop it. It didn't say we are now moving on in a different direction. Okay? It simply doubled down on what we've always done. Fiducia Supplicans is saying we're departing from the church's tradition. You can say that we're not, but they are, because there never before in the history of the church have there been these sort of unofficial, non-liturgical blessings of homosexual couples who are presenting themselves to priests precisely as couples in order to get blessed.
Right.
And Fiducia Supplicans itself says this is a development of doctrine. And he even says this is innovative. Okay? So that's the difference between this and Humanae Vitae. For crying out loud, one's a papal encyclical, one's not. One affirms the church's tradition, one denies the church's tradition in order to develop something new. I'm sorry. The comparison is outrageous, and because it wants to say that those of us who are complaining about Fiducia Supplicans are as bad as, say, Charlie Curran was back in 1969.
Right.
You know, and he concocted a whole new moral theory, proportionalism, in order to justify, you know, this kind of dissent. Anyway, I'm on a rant now, but
no, I mean, you're right. It also just does grave insult to Paul VI, just in comparing this work by I mean, there's a part early in Fiducia Supplicans where Fernandez goes into this. I honestly was laughing, Larry, as I was reading it. He was talking about, like, there are blessings that ascend to God, and then there are blessings that descend from God, and then there are blessings that extend from one man to another. Just like, come on, man, come on.
Yeah, that's a reach. I would add one last thing too. Paul, you just said, you implied it. Paul VI issued this reaffirmation of Humanae Vitae at a time when it was grossly unpopular to do so.
Absolutely.
The 99% of Catholics and the vast overwhelming people in the broader culture all thought the church was going to change its teaching, wanted it to change its teaching. And when it didn't, that really was essentially the end of the Paul VI papacy. It destroyed him, and it destroyed his papacy because it was so unpopular. This document gives a green light to that which is very popular, that which is part of the zeitgeist,
yes,
that which is current culturally fashionable, and it will bring no cultural enemies beyond the far right wing to this pope.
Yep.
It'll bring him nothing but accolades.
Absolutely.
Yet further evidence of this reforming pope, this wonderful pope.
I mean, Chris Christie already said that his thinking has evolved on the gay marriage issue, and look at the Catholic Church and what they just released, because even the Catholic Church is changing on this issue. So it is confusing. It's confusing to the faithful for sure. Last point on this, Larry, the press release that Fernandez had to publish to follow up. I mean, it's just it's funny. I just, again, laughed while reading it. I mean, there's even a part, you mentioned the 10 to 15 seconds thing, but he says at this point, I think it's paragraph or section 5. The fifth paragraph of section 5, he says, we are talking about something that lasts about 10 or 15 seconds. Does it make sense to deny these kinds of blessings to these two people who ask for them? Hilarious.
It's hysterical.
But
so now we're timing the blessings.
Right. Number 3, section 3 of this press release. I already mentioned how the African bishops, more or less unanimously from my reading of it, have said, this is a disaster. We are not going to implement this in our conference because of the risk of causing grave confusion and scandal to our people, and it will not be pastorally prudent or in concordance with the gospel.
That's right.
The press release that Fernandez says totally skirts around their actual objections and tries to make their objections about something that they are not. It says, the cases of some Episcopal conferences must be understood in their contexts. In several countries, there are strong cultural and even legal issues that require time and pastoral strategies that go beyond the short term. So basically just like those backwards rubes in Africa.
Oh, I'm glad you brought this up.
Just some cultural things, yeah.
Because
go ahead.
It underscores the racist nature of that response.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he says, if there are laws that condemn the mere act of declaring oneself as a homosexual with prison, and in some cases with torture and even death, it goes without saying that a blessing would be imprudent. It does not go without saying. What? That's not what their objection is about at all, in the slightest.
I agree with the criticism of certain very draconian forms of civil legislation against homosexuality that one finds. And I've mentioned this in other podcasts, that this is a reality in the African situation, that many African bishops themselves have said, this is not good,
right,
but still we have to deal with it.
Yes.
But that's not why they've objected.
At all.
And furthermore, there are civil codes in the Western world that fall afoul of Catholic teaching as well, such as the unlimited license for abortion, for example.
How about
in Western cultures? Or no-fault divorce. I mean, there are other aspects of Western culture that the Cardinal Fernandez of the world just turn a blind eye to because that's his culture.
Right.
He's not going to look at Western liberal democracy and say, here's why you guys really fall short on abortion and divorce and whole family issues. I mean, as John Paul II called it, a culture of death. Okay, they're not going to go down that road at all because you guys, there's no enemies to the left of us here. You guys have your hearts in the right place. But these weirdo Africans over here who are still living, 300 years behind the times in the Dark Ages and so on, because he might as well have said that. He might as well have said, hey, you backward Africans, don't presume to lecture the rest of us. Just like Walter Casper, Cardinal Casper said before the Sin in the Family when he was caught on tape by Ed Penton saying, the Africans should not tell us so much what to do. And in the context was because they haven't yet gone through the cultural transformation and enlightenment that we have gone through.
Right.
They have yet to go through their enlightenment.
Yeah, the enlightened people, yeah.
Yeah, and so this is just part, and that goes back to what I said about it gives the lie to this whole thing about this is a papacy for the peripheries.
Yeah.
It might be for the sexual peripheries, but it's not, I think that's kind of what is being exposed is what so much of this papacy is about, is valorizing the sexual peripheries.
Yeah. It's, on one level, as I've said many times already today, it's this whole rollout has just been a disaster and it's been very funny in many respects. It's also very sad though, because there are people on the peripheries who are confused, saddened, scandalized by all this. And that's terrible. I know we're just about out of time, Larry. You've probably heard this quote before. Hillaire Belloc, fantastic writer, obviously long since passed. But he said, the Catholic Church is an institution I am bound to hold divine, but for unbelievers, a proof of its divinity might be found in the fact that no merely human institution conducted with such knavish imbecility would have lasted a fortnight.
Absolutely true. And that was from a different era from ours, but it's still true.
Yeah.
And I would say, too, along those lines, I know a lot of gay people who are trying to live chaste lives within the church who have told me, and then maybe you have this experience too, have told me they feel completely thrown under the bus and betrayed by this papacy.
Yes.
It feels like the entire movement is in the direction, because here the gay people that are trying to live chastely according to the church's teachings already take all kinds of criticism from within the gay community. Oh, you guys are just imbibing the ideology of your oppressors. You guys are just self-loathing homosexuals who have not yet truly embraced yourselves.
Right.
You've bought into this really hate-filled ideology that's distorting you and making you hate yourselves. You need to come out of this. So they already get that from the gay community. Then they turn around and they get it from the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Oh, we need to bless you because, what you're doing is just so great in so many ways. And they really feel betrayed by this. Absolutely betrayed by this.
Yeah, it's so sad. And I totally agree with you and have friends in the same position. There's an organization, by the way, I have asked them for an interview, and we're going to see if we can work it out, so hopefully soon, but it's called Eden Invitation. It is for Catholics who are struggling with same-sex attraction or other sort of non-heterosexual or sort of non-conforming sexual desires and identities. Great organization, and they are trying to live faithfully.
Who runs that?
Anna, I'll find that for you. I'll include a link actually in the show notes for anyone who's interested. But yeah, so I'm hoping to have Anna on the podcast soon to just talk about what that is, because you're right, Larry. It is so countercultural. It is such a difficult cross to bear, and people like Anna and members of Invention are doing exactly that, trying to live bravely. Anna Carter, by the way, that's the name. But I'm going to drop a link in the show notes to this as well.
Please do.
Yeah, so we always end with Universal Call of Holiness. Larry, I think that's a good one. We should certainly pray for our LGBT brothers and sisters who are struggling with issues of same-sex attraction, feeling thrown under the bus. We should obviously always have love and charity for everyone in the church who is on the margins. I certainly agree with Pope Francis and his pastoral impulse to do exactly that. This declaration from the DDF is not moving us closer in that direction. I think it's moving us farther away. So I think what I would end with is just encouraging my listeners: do not be dismayed by this. Do not be discouraged by this. This is this is an unfortunate thing coming from an incompetent, bureaucrat cardinal in the Vatican. But I think we really shouldn't make too much of it. Maybe you disagree, Larry, but I think that the church is obviously still the church. She will be here. She was here long before you and I were. She will be here long after we are here. She is the vessel of God's mercy on earth. And she will endure this small, silly declaration from the DDF notwithstanding.
Sure will.
So that's my closing. Larry, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I would just say that, I often get criticized by people saying you should show more respect to the Pope and so on and so forth, that you're undermining the faith of people because you make it seem as if the Pope is, look, we've had bad popes, and I make no bones about the fact that I don't think Pope Francis is a very good Pope. But he's not a heretic. He hasn't destroyed. He is the Pope. But he's made some very serious, I think all of his mistakes are pastoral ones. And I think he's made some very serious pastoral mistakes. And I defended him for 5 years, but the pastoral mistakes keep piling up, and I'm not going to remain silent. So make that what it is. But he's the Pope, and he's not a heretic, and the papacy is intact, and we've had clunker popes before. I think he's a bit of a clunker, but he's got good qualities too. He does have good qualities, and so there you go.
I think that's fair. I will not defend many of the more controversial things that he has said and done, but I will certainly defend his papacy as being true, and he is the vicar of Christ. And so, I would certainly debate with the sedevacantist all day about that reality. But I think, like you said,
even St. Paul had to confront St. Peter once when he made a mistake about the Judaizers and circumcision.
Yeah, that's true. And I do think we need to be clear-headed about the pastoral mistakes, because the pastoral mistakes are the visible ones to the people in the pews, right? Theologians and the academics, they'll read through and parse all the encyclicals, and they'll argue back and forth over the finer points of Amoris Laetitia and Evangelii Gaudium and this declaration. But the pastoral impulses and where those mistakes should be made are where you'll see reverberations all the way down to the lowest form of the lowest level of the faithful, right? The sort of
absolutely
just darkening the door of a church for the first time in their life. And they're not going to understand the fundamentals if they've been, misled pastorally. So I think it really is good for us to be clear-headed about that, and to always boldly proclaim the truth of the gospel. God is love. God loves every single one of us, and that is what the church must proclaim. That always involves teaching us what is true as well. And what is true is important because it is what is most conducive to our human flourishing and to our ultimate calling to be fully united with the divinity, the most holy Trinity. So that's where we'll end. Larry, thanks so much for joining me again on this show. It was great to see you again. Hope you had a Merry Christmas.
And you too. Thanks a lot.
To my listeners, I'm going to drop those links in the show notes. You can read the declaration, you can read the press release, the Pillar Catholic article outlining responses to it, the link to Eden Invitation, and like I said, hopefully I'll have Anna Carter on soon to talk about that. Larry, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
To my listeners, great to be back. Great to be back on your screens doing another episode. I'll be back soon. And until next time, God bless you.